This is Gesher, the podcast that's bridging the gap between the Jewish and evangelical Christian communities with conversations that matter. Here's your host, Ty Perry, with the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Gesher. As you know, we at the Friends of Israel take the hatred of the Jewish people, antisemitism, very seriously. We have since our founding back in 1938. And anti-Semitism, it's nothing new. In fact, it's been called the world's oldest hatred. But since Hamas's savage attack on Israel in October of 2023, the hatred of the Jewish people has rapidly become the most prevalent and accepted form of bigotry, one that more often than not turns violent. Many organizations, Jewish and non-Jewish alike, work to push back against anti-Semitism, but there's one group in particular whose efforts are aimed at effectively responding to anti-Semitism at a grassroots level, and that's the End Jew Hatred campaign. Well, here to talk with me today about the work that End Jew Hatred is doing is Adar Rubin, End Jew Hatred's Director of Mobilization. Adar, welcome.
Thank you, Ty, for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. I first became aware of the Lawfare Project and End Jew Hatred through Brooke Goldstein, and I'm sure we'll talk about her in a little bit. She spoke at an event in Grand Rapids, Michigan that the Friends of Israel hosted a number of years ago, and in following her, I learned more about End Jew Hatred, love the work you're doing, and so I want to talk about specifically how this all began, but before we do that, let's talk about let's set the stage here. So we're seeing not only in the United States, but globally, a rise in anti-Semitism. Tell us a little bit about what's happening, and in your opinion, why are we seeing such a heated rise right now?
Well, I mean, you put it out perfectly. I mean, it's the oldest form of hatred. It's the most widely accepted form of hatred, and there's a lot of reasons why that's becoming so prevalent right now, and it's really heartbreaking. A lot of people just look for a scapegoat. A lot of people look for an easy answer to their problems. And people lack accountability at times, personal responsibility, personal reflections. Right now, we're seeing an escalation of this in the online spaces, most prominently, I would say, X in particular. But we also forget to look at other forums, even in college spaces, like, what's it called, Yik Yak. You know, right. Yik Yak, I'm sure that's probably a social media app that you haven't heard in a long time. Sure. But, you know, for those who aren't familiar, Yik Yak is an anonymous thread, or not an anonymous thread, but like an anonymous app where you could post, you know, freely. You know, back in the day when I was in college, you know, 650 years ago, I'm kidding, really 2013 to 2017, people would go on Yik Yak and they would use it back in the day mostly to trash fraternities and, you know, make fun of certain things on campus, you know, inside jokes amongst fraternities, things like that. So it was all like done in good humor, but now it's just evolved to anti-Semitism on college spaces. Like at the University of Michigan, very, very recently, there were threats of a Hillel protest that transpired. I will get into the University of Michigan later, but the point being is that people are now weaponizing it to mobilize people into action to basically spew more Jew hatred and cause more stress and trauma for Jewish students on college campuses. You know, we were founded to help institutions, businesses, religious leaders, politicians, celebrities uphold the value of embracing Jewish civil rights, to stand in solidarity with us. And I'm so grateful to see the support over the past year and a half, or 15 months right now, amongst the interfaith community, people from various different groups. And, you know, opportunities like this are why I continue to fight, you know, to continue speaking out and building these relationships. You know, I've been doing this even before my time at End Jew Hatred, when I was working at the Jewish Community Relations Council.
Well, it's obviously always been an important thing to fight, but we're seeing now that, as I mentioned, it's becoming more acceptable, it seems, especially in the wake of 10/7. And so I guess let's talk about how End Jew Hatred began. I think, first of all, that title, that name, End Jew Hatred, Anti-Semitism, I talk to churches quite often, and I've actually had people say, I don't understand what anti-Semitism is. Well, when you have a name like End Jew Hatred, that really puts it out there. How did that start? How did this whole movement begin?
So the movement began a little over 4 years ago, and this actually was because of several civil rights movements that we studied. It became most prevalent when we saw the rise of Black Lives Matter in 2020 in response to George Floyd. Now, this was a moment for various leaders to assess the moment, see what works, see what doesn't. You know, we saw healthy activism and not so healthy activism within like BLM, but, you know, not everybody is perfect, and we wanted to meet the moment to study and see what they were doing to create meaningful change. And in some capacity, they did in various different different realms and different spaces like the academic space and whatnot. And, you know, we saw that there was an absence of Jewish civil rights activism. And through that time, we noticed that we didn't see that many people, you know, go out in the streets and protest in the most healthy way. You know, we're always studying the civil rights movement. And, you know, one classic example of that, like even today, you know, earlier before we started, I was telling you about our Unmask the Hate campaign.
Yeah.
You know, that was done in response to studying various different civil rights era laws that were written to take on the weaponization of anonymity done by the Ku Klux Klan to attack the African American community in the streets. Mm-hmm. You know, this is like during the 60s. And we wanted to implement something similar to take on the masked anonymity that we're seeing in grassroots activism, in anti-Israel grassroots activism more specifically. A lot of people that go out in the streets, concealing their identities, knowing what they're saying is wrong, knowing that they're looking for violence. Mm-hmm. And because of that, you know, we're looking to create meaningful change through it by saying, hey, you know, if you are so confident to spew the world's oldest hatred, why is it that you have to hide it? Why do you have to conceal your identity in order to say what you wanted to say?
Do you think those people know deep down that their so-called anti-Zionism is indeed anti-Semitism?
Oh, some of them do. Yeah. Some of them do. I mean, if you watch various anti-Israel rallies, you know, you'll have a couple people openly say Jew instead of Zionist. Mm-hmm. You know, when I went to Columbia University during the second or third day of their encampments, you know, Columbia really set the national tone for creating a campaign to have encampments all across the nation at various Ivy Leagues and various prestigious universities. But when I went there, you know, to stand in support with Shai Davidai, you know, probably one of the greatest academic dissidents of our lifetime, I remember, you know, walking past the crowd. So how it all started, you know, initially we planned a rally to, you know, speak out against the rise of Jew hatred that was escalating at Columbia, you know, calling out the former president at the time, Anousheh Shafiq, calling for a resignation because we assessed that she has no desire and had no desire to make the campus safer, not just for Jewish students, but for all students. Mm-hmm. You know, the anti-Israel mob, they're not just going after Jewish students. They're looking to disrupt and make campus life harder for everybody, whether it's preventing people from going to class or just doxing people just for supporting Israel, Jews and non-Jews alike. Mm-hmm. So when we came and did the second day or third day in combat encampment rally calling for Shafiq's resignation, I got a tip from the New York PD about an hour to an hour and a half right before saying this organization called Within Our Lifetime, an extremist anti-Israel organization that's contributed to numerous violent assaults against Jewish people, including Joey Borgen in New York City. That made national news. They got word of our rally to empower Jewish students and rapidly mobilized, and it led to two groups outside the gates. And when I walked past them near the end of the rally, I remember to this day two people screaming at me directly, with one of the guys saying, Yehudi, Yehudi, you think you're safe, Yehudi, but you're not. We're going to find you. Now, Yehudi is a slur for Jew.
Yeah.
So the mask is completely off. nothing they could say could justify their means. For what it's worth, it's just become no secret. Like, it's just become no secret. You could literally Google and search these things on social media. Yeah. You know, we've seen this transpire in numerous universities. You know, they usually weaponize the guise of anti-Zionism without understanding that Zionism is the most central core to Judaism. Right. Being a Zionist means if you believe in Israel's right to self-determination and self-defense, you know, that makes anybody a Zionist. Mm-hmm. You know, you even have people in the anti-Israel movement that'll say, oh, you know, I believe Israel has a right to exist, but I'm still going to lambast it for its decisions and fixate on the negatives rather than the positives. You know, and they say that's where the anti-Zionism comes from. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and it is the oldest hatred, as we said, and you see, you know, really from the time of Abraham, you see this, and it manifests itself in different ways, but it's always that nascent hatred that's there for the Jewish people. And so it's that hatred then that through a context or a lens of the civil rights that drives your work. What is the exact mission of End Jew Hatred?
To create a better world for Jewish people and our allies, to help Jewish people thrive in institutions and various, you know, spaces, like especially the campus space, you know, to build bridges amongst other communities. You know, at the end of the day, we want to make the world a better place. You know, our mindset isn't burn the house down. Right. You know, there's other groups out there that don't have the rationale or the strategy. I mean, it exists in all spaces, but what I'm trying to say is that we want to create a better life. You know, like, for example, I was at DePaul University not long ago standing up for Max Long and Michael Kaminsky. And one of the chants that we led was, we want to make it better. We want to make it better. Yeah. You know, DePaul University is redeemable. It is not at the degree in which Harvard, Columbia, and Yale currently are. Mm-hmm. You know, there's opportunity for this, and the president of DePaul is actually pretty responsive. So, you know, we see a lot of positive impact that lies ahead. And, you know, we even saw that at the University of Michigan. 1 year ago, I would have said, oh, the University of Michigan is irredeemable. But at the same time, the escalation of Jew hatred at the University of Michigan at that time was a tricky situation for a lot of regents, or for all the regents, and for the university leadership to take on. They're not trying to dismiss it. They're like trying to navigate the road. And soon they saw that the incident rate was going up so much, and that the disruptions became so, prevalent, that they decided to ask for outside help. And, you know, the regents have been cooperating with us. They've been listening to several of our activists, including our partner activists that, you know, work side by side with us. And they've taken the right steps to ensure that campus safety is a top priority. You know, if anything, I could make the argument that the University of Michigan is leading the charge nationally, but you could also cite the success of other schools. Like, one example is the University of South Florida. So, you know, we always fixate on the negatives, and oftentimes for all the right reasons. Sure. You know, like I mentioned, Harvard, Yale, and Columbia, they're the irredeemable ones, where they've made it clear, even with Minouche Shafiq's resignation, you know, which we're glad to have led the charge and been the first Jewish organization to openly call for it. You know, UMich has actually been setting the tone differently, you know, by, you know, firing that DEI leader that made that horrible comment saying that the university was run by wealthy Jews, you know, considering scrapping elements of the DEI program. The fact that they charged 11 students, you know, for disruptions and vandalisms, the fact that the regents right now are being targeted in some of the most vicious ways imaginable. I'm sure you probably heard the recent news with Jordan Acker.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that. You and I are located here in Michigan, so we have listeners from all over. But let's talk about the University of Michigan. So the regents are leading the charge in a good way, and they're facing the the cost of that in some regard, especially Regent Acker. So tell us a little bit about that. I'm not sure that all of our listeners would know what happened there or what's been happening with him.
Yeah, so a couple days ago, actually, let's go back past a couple days ago. Jordan Acker, for one, has been an incredible leader at the University of Michigan who has really risen to the occasion, especially over the last year. Jordan has been working in a bipartisan fashion with his other colleagues in the regents. You know, you get Republican and Democrat regents that are present. And Jordan has been vocally against divestment, he's very, very anti-BDS.
Which, for listeners, is the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel.
Right. So Jordan has been pretty vocal on that issue. And not long ago, meaning like over the summer, his home and Sarah Hubbard, another regent at the University of Michigan, both their homes were targeted, in the middle of the night, where they like splattered like fake blood, fake body bags, and, had messages calling for divestment. A couple days ago, there was another attack against Jordan Acker and his family where anarchists showed up to his home at 2 a.m, threw 2 mason jars full of urine into his window and graffitied divestment now on his wife's car. They woke up the kids in the middle of the night, and I, obviously immediately when I heard what happened, I reached out directly to Jordan. Jordan has been very, very responsive. He's been updating me on various issues that have been transpiring at the university, and that's key, collaboration and providing information to, the institutional organizations like the Hillels, the Chabads, the Jewish Resource Center, giving them up-to-date reports on what's going on. And finding out ways we can collaboratively work together and having those conversations with them. Even talking to our students, especially our campus fellow, Dan Viederman. I'm sure he's going to be watching. Shout out to Dan, but really shout out to all our fellows. They make incredible progress. They've done an incredible job this year and last year. But the point is that the university has been having these conversations, with the outside and inside organizations. As a matter of fact, our campus fellow, Dan, along with several students at the University of Michigan, took President Ono to the Nova exhibition when it came to Michigan. I have not seen a single university president attend a Nova exhibition. I mean, if I'm wrong, I'd love to see it, Yeah,
and it's a powerful thing. If listeners, if you're able to find the Nova exhibition in your area, go. It's incredibly moving.
Yeah, I cannot emphasize that enough. I went in Culver City, and it was a very, very, very emotional experience. I was able to pour out the tears that I've been wanting to pour out for so long. In this role, it takes a lot of mental resiliency, not to break and to show, it takes everything to show courage. And, at that time, this came not long after the recent report of Hirsch Goldberg Poland's death, which rocked the Jewish community. There are people even in Metro Detroit that have, a familial connection to his family. We're a lot smaller than we think. 0.2% of the world's population. It seems like we know everybody. Everybody knows everybody. Yeah. And my heart really, really broke at that moment. And that was the moment where I always had the fire in me, but at that point, it just became a supernova.
Well, and let's just very briefly mention this. The Nova exhibition is, as I went through it a number of weeks ago, I really thought of it as essentially a Holocaust-like museum, a display, but not about anti-Semitism in the 1930s and 40s, but about what happened on October 7th, 2023. And so this is something you're saying that President Ono from University of Michigan, he went to this.
Oh, yeah. He 100% went. There's pictures. He gave a very, very powerful speech. Ono has done an incredible job. I used to be critical of Ono, and I could not be happier that I'm wrong. In this line of work, I am always surprised when I'm proven wrong for all the right reasons. And in this case, Ono has really risen up to the occasion. I think he's done an incredible job speaking out and rapidly mobilizing law enforcement, whenever an incident transpires, even if it's something that, wasn't even on campus, a couple, I would say around September, if I'm not mistaken, there was that incident with the rabbi, in Southfield, Michigan, where he hosted several Jewish students at his home for a dinner, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there was a random robbery that took place. Now, don't get me wrong, I can't really define it as an act of anti-Semitism because it was wrong place, wrong time, and there was no evidence supporting any destruction of Jewish relics or anything that motivated it. But the thing that stood out from it was the fact that Ono rapidly mobilized in that moment, knowing that this was something that impacted Jewish students, and I completely understand the depths of fear and safety that we live in our lifetime. As a matter of fact, I was reading this morning that there was one synagogue, I think it was out of New Jersey, I can quickly double check, but I saw that one person on social media posted that her synagogue is spending $90,000 on security. That is, it's scary that we have to invest so much money for something that obviously is warranted, but it shouldn't be a time where Jewish people have to invest so much money on protection because they can't trust their local elected officials. Some of them can't. I would feel this exact same pain for any other school or any other religious group that has to take these precautions, and go ahead.
I just want to say about that because, one of the things that we've been hearing for the last 15 months, really, since October 7th, is particularly politicians who come out and they will say something like, I stand against anti-Semitism and all other forms of hatred, as if anti-Semitism is just like every other form of hatred. Now, certainly, we would be against any form of hatred against people,
right.
And yet, while there are attacks against Christian communities, most churches are not investing $90,000 because of the threats. Most mosques aren't having to do that.
Right.
There's something unique about the hatred of the Jewish people.
Right, but I can also say at this moment, I am deeply worried about the security for the Christian community.
Sure.
There was a mass shooting that just took place. Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it in Wisconsin?
Yes, at the school.
Yeah, and it's horrifying. And then my heart broke when there was that one mass shooting that happened at, I think it was a Christian school in California, if I'm not mistaken, where the two kindergarten boys were shot.
Interestingly, because of their support of Israel, because of the school's position on Israel.
Why do those kindergartners have to pay the price for that? I'm so glad they're okay, but, that event shook me to my core and enraged me. It should enrage everybody. And it's something that really, really, really demonstrates the need to support our interfaith allies, and it shouldn't even have to rely on tragedies like this. It should be year-round, 24/7, and all our initiatives that we do. One of my favorite Christian organizations that I work with is the Philos Project.
Very good organization.
They're phenomenal. I shout out to Luke Moon, he's doing a phenomenal job. They planned an October 7th solidarity event in Washington, D.C., which is where I was, where I attended, and to feel the love and support from various different communities, it really was the medicine that I needed for my heart.
Well, let's talk about, just in the last few minutes here, some of the other initiatives. You mentioned certainly University of Michigan and others, but what are some of the other initiatives that End Jew Hatred has been able to target and to bring some change in those locations?
Right. So we work around the clock, around the country. We do various initiatives, whether it's email campaigns, whether it's on-the-ground action. One event or one campaign that I did fairly recently in Michigan, and it's probably the one that I'm actually most proud of, is this Stephanie Faki ordeal, the Bloomfield Township Board of Trustee member, former Board of Trustee member now, as a matter of fact. So to backtrack what happened, there was a board member from the Bloomfield Township Board of Trustees who went on social media and made horrifying, disparaging comments, not just against the Jewish community, but against supporters of the Jewish community, saying that every Zionist is the scum of the earth. And that led to immense public blowback. And I managed to work with various different groups to rapidly mobilize in the span of a week to have over 200 people, with the assistance of the Jewish Federation of Metro Detroit and various other partners, including interfaith partners like the Coalition for Black and Jewish Unity, huge shout out to them. People showed up to that Board of Trustees meeting. All the members of the Board of Trustees are pro-Israel with the exception of Faki.
Good.
And there was over 3 hours of public testimony grilling her for her horrible, horrible, horrible post. And to add depth to how unsorry she was about the ordeal, at the hearing, she even tried to quote Elie Wiesel to justify her remarks, which, obviously upset the entire audience. It was hard to get everybody to remain quiet. I don't blame everybody for being this angry.
Sure.
And another thing to reference is that, there was over 3.5 hours of public testimony. People from various communities spoke out. People from the Christian community even condemned it. There was coverage not just from the Detroit Jewish News, but there was also an Israeli outlet that was there. This got some pretty quick traction. And at the end of the 3.5 hours, the entire Board of Trustees ended up censoring her in the moment. And one person in particular from the Board of Trustees, in her remarks, actually mentioned that she was going to support Faki, and without specifying that it was me who pointed this out when I gave my testimony, I pointed out when I was speaking to the crowd that she had no desire to apologize for her remarks and proved it by showing a social media post that she made hours before, where she basically shared some anti-Israel account, trying to mobilize people to come and support her and defend her. She did. She got 20 knuckleheads that showed up, and obviously they were just spewing crazy lie after lie after lie. One person was screaming so loudly that one of the board members said, thank you for that. I can't really understand what she was saying. So,
Not super effective, but...
Yeah, the one who's most correct isn't the person who's the loudest.
Yep.
I graduated from Michigan State with a degree in ad management and PR. People assume I took the public policy route and went to James Madison, but I didn't, because it's not just what the message is that you're conveying, it's how you present it. So I showed that social media post from her story, calling her out, saying, you have no remorse, you just want people to defend you. And that same board member who kind of joked and said I couldn't understand what that lady was saying, actually said I was going to support Faki and hear her out and give her the benefit of the doubt, assuming that her account was hacked. But in this case, from what I'm hearing out of you and out of all the people that are here to defend you, it's become evidently clear that you have no remorse for your actions. Yeah. And they voted to overwhelmingly censor her. And this is someone that was outgoing, so her term ended on November 20th. And the Jewish community and everybody there, they felt incredible after that.
Sure.
The most euphoric release of happiness imaginable, because they stood up for themselves and they felt empowered, and they knew, whether or not she is removed from the board before November 20th, who cares, because she's outgoing and we stood up for ourselves. And even after that, I had people there that were Republican representatives and Democratic representatives, and people that were even subjected to incidents of Jew hatred themselves, like Barry Goodman. We were talking about Jordan Acker, Goodman Acker. His law office was vandalized. Their law offices were vandalized over the summer in Southfield. Yeah. He stood up and gave a fiery speech condemning her, and it's awesome to have that kind of support. And people like that continued to feel inspired to continue to act, even though they're we're happy we did what we did, but we need to apply pressure to Whitmer and call on her to remove her from the board. I ended up talking with several folks. I learned that the process of a trial for it would have taken some time, but still, people were satisfied with the outcome. And here's something that people don't know as to the extent of damage that was done to Faki. So there were a lot of articles that were written about this effort, and the public backlash against her grew so large that she began sharing social media posts on her Instagram saying, like, reason number 3,489 why I'm leaving the United States. She is leaving the country.
Wow.
We scared her so bad that she's considering going back to Lebanon. And it's just mind-boggling that we can have that kind of outcome. This was a shocking outcome, if anything. It was satisfactory. And
no tears shed.
No tears shed. You get what you deserve. And honestly, I really owe it to my community for how empowered and energized they are right now. And not just my community, but other organizations that are now working in conjunction with us, legacy organizations, various institutions that really, really, really are supporting our initiatives and see the need for a grassroots element,
Well, on that note, we just have a couple minutes left here, but I want to ask you, how can other people get involved and help this campaign? And I'm thinking, many of our listeners would be identified as evangelical Christians, and there's certainly a kinship between the Jewish community and evangelical Christians as it concerns the roots of our shared faiths. And they want to mobilize. They want to do something. So, Adar, it's all on you. What do Christians do to help you?
Absolutely. And, I would suggest they would go on End Jew Hatred's website, go to the Start a Chapter page, fill out the form. And, some people may say we want to start a chapter in Michigan, and a Michigan chapter already exists. I would still add them into the group chat. I would give them guidance, give them the do's and don'ts. We're nonpartisan. We don't do left versus right battles, culture wars, all that stuff. Our fixation is on ending Jew hatred. It's as simple as it gets. And to me, I have 400, 500 people in my Michigan chapter alone, but, as much as we're seeing success, in my heart, I wouldn't call it successful unless we have 500 non-Jews as well in that group chat. I think there's a lot of room for the interfaith community to work together on this. And, one thing that I noticed in particular, and it's something that I wanted to ask you, Ty,
Sure.
A lot of people from the Christian community, understanding the value of Judeo-Christian values, stand up for our community, and usually it's in response to things targeting Israel or just targeting the Jewish community, which I love the fact that they stand up for us. But, on top of that, I see other issues like historical revisionism and distortions that take place that energize the Christian community to speak out against the anti-Israel crowd. One example, I can give is my friend, she's out in Rhode Island. She put up an Instagram post. She went to a Christmas, parade or something, like a town parade, celebrating Christmas. And there were anti-Israel activists that were projecting onto a building, Jesus was a Palestinian. Things like that, that really, really, really upset the Jew, or not just the Jewish community, but, the Christian community.
Sure.
And it wasn't even just that. That's become a common thing that I've seen people from the evangelical community speak out against on social media, and rightfully so. But what are some things from your own experience, that are not related to Jew hatred that mobilize the Christian community to speak out against our shared enemies, so to speak? Yeah. What are the things that, impact you besides Jew hatred that energize and mobilize your community?
Well, I appreciate the question. I think I have to say, this is the first time I've been interviewed on the Gesher podcast, and I love that. So thanks for the question. I think for evangelical Christians, what motivates us in and this is to answer your question, what motivates us to combat anti-Semitism is, as I said, a shared values, but fundamentally it comes from the scriptures. And so we are motivated by anything, and I mean societally, that violates what God has revealed in His Word. And so certainly when we open the pages of the Tanakh or of the New Testament, wherever you look, you see this love for the Jewish people exhibited by God.
Yeah.
And so that motivates us. Now, when it comes to other issues, then these are issues certainly that are controversial, and maybe we wouldn't all agree, even between the Jewish and Christian communities. But when it comes to abortion, we view that as a civil rights issue because there we see these unborn children as people, and that comes because of our understanding of the Word of God. So anything that where we see culture and injustices within the culture intersecting with issues that matter to God's heart as revealed in the Scriptures, that's going to be the area where Christians want to mobilize. And certainly that includes anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism.
Understandable. I mean, on top of that, there's like several other key component issues too that impact the Christian community in which there's several distortions perpetrated by these anti-Israel or fringe anarchist type people, and it just upsets them. Yep. It upsets your community, and like abortion, for example. Sure. Like, I want to know, like, what are some more things that the Jewish community can work on, that can speak out on, that impact, what you do. Now, in our realm, our specialty is Jew hatred and, campus and public spaces. We're pro-Israel in nature. We understand the root of Zionism and how that manifests, or anti-Zionism manifests into anti-Semitism. But, as an organization, it's not on us to tell people how to vote or, what Israel's position should be.
Sure.
People can get behind the message of end Jew hatred easily. But I want to know, what are some things that the anti-Israel crowd are doing besides, just abortion, that are harming your community, that energize your community to rapidly speak out? Like I mentioned, the Jesus was a Palestinian distortion.
Sure. Yeah, well, I think fundamentally what it comes down to is this misrepresentation of, or a hijacking of the biblical narrative. So to your point, we just saw, evangelical Christians, we don't acknowledge the Pope as any authority, but he recently dedicated a nativity scene that had baby Jesus wrapped in a keffiyeh. So we're seeing things like that. I think that there are probably a number of issues that if we compared notes, there would be things that we could speak out on. But so often what you're seeing with the rise of anti-Semitism, particularly on college campuses, is what's motivating it is this idea of critical theory. Well, critical theory certainly affects the Jewish community, but it also affects the Christian community because we are supposedly the imperialist, lovers of slavery and things like that because of a misunderstanding of our beliefs. And certainly there's some history there that needs to be acknowledged. There have been Christians that have owned slaves and things like that, but critical theory doesn't permit any forgiveness. And so
that's what's missing.
It is.
People fixate on the shaming and they don't fixate on forgiveness. Like, what has the Christian and Jewish community done, post these eras to better the lives of other communities, to give sanctuary to people of different backgrounds? And, people, I just put it out perfectly. People are fixated on the negatives constantly. And you're right. It's all about hijacking people's faiths and twisting it and to suit their narrative. And you mentioned the college spaces at Columbia University. I remember during Passover last year, they did an encampment Seder, and they they literally wrote the Hebrew text backwards. Like when you write in Hebrew, you write from right to left.
Right.
They were writing it out from left to right. And I've never seen that before. This is Jewish Voice for Peace.
Yeah.
This is another thing too. It's like the names of certain organizations, like Jewish Voice for Peace, completely distorting their own meaning. Their actions definitely don't speak peace.
No. I had a run-in with them, actually, a number of years ago. I had an anti-Israel, supposedly Jewish Voice for Peace activist who essentially stalked me for several city blocks in Las Vegas, screaming at me. And so I experienced firsthand what you're saying. They may be Jewish in name, certainly not peace. I think it's more voice than anything that's happening.
It's really just all voice, and their voice in itself is questionable. They used to have admins that were based in Lebanon, as a matter of
Yeah.
fact. Like, you know, I don't even think a majority of their membership is even Jewish, but, you know, in the end Jew hatred movement, we take people from all different backgrounds and we encourage them to speak up for Jewish civil rights. You know, these people don't.
Well, Adar, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. And I want to thank you on behalf of all of the End Jew Hatred campaign for what you're doing to mobilize not only the Jewish community, but also other communities to combat the oldest hatred. Thank you.
I thank you, Ty, for bringing me on. And, you know, this really is a passion project, and anything that we can do to help support the Christian community, you know, the door at End Jew Hatred is always open. We always want to mobilize the Christian community. So check us out at www.endjewhatred.com. You know, if you want to reach out to me or anyone from the team, reach out, you know, start a chapter. We encourage mobilization. I do all these different workshops, you know, Activism 101, what is healthy activism, giving a proper education on strategies that have and haven't worked on the past. It's an ongoing study, but we see the effects taking place. And because other groups pay attention, they want to invest in us. And, you know, we want to return that as well. We want to give back to everybody. So, you know, to all those in the Christian community, thank you for standing with us. I wish you a very early Merry Christmas and a Happy Hanukkah as well. And I am always going to be there to support you no matter what.
Well, thank you, Adar, and that goes both ways. Happy Hanukkah to you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Gesher, a ministry outreach production of FOI Equip, your free resource for learning and engaging with the scriptures from a Jewish perspective. To learn more, visit foiequip.org. And for more information about Ty, visit foi.org/Perry. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Shalom.